Wealth runs deeper than stocks, real estate, or assets. It's a hidden system. For centuries, the world's oldest families have controlled the game, unseen, unnoticed. Their riches are built on trust, leverage, and secrets. What if their wealth isn't just about money? What if it's about something much darker? For centuries, the world's oldest families built their fortunes quietly, not through invention, but through trust, through relationships. Wealth wasn't just about resources, it was about how those resources were connected. The bonds they formed were their true wealth, invisible to the untrained eye. But make no mistake, it's these relationships that have always dictated power. In the Middle Ages, families didn't sit in boardrooms or trade stocks. They made their power through strategic marriages, land deals, and alliances. A trusted marriage meant more than just love. It was currency. A powerful name became just as valuable as a kingdom. These families knew, in a world of war and scarcity, survival wasn't about gold. It was about loyalty. The earliest family dynasties didn't care much for the pomp of wealth. They weren't interested in flaunting their riches. Instead, they focused on building invisible networks. Wealth was held quietly through trust. A shared secret, a discreet loan, a marriage of convenience. These were the tools not of opulence, but of survival. But these family networks weren't just born from necessity. They were built through a delicate dance, a dance of power. They knew that when one family trusted another, they weren't just growing their wealth. They were growing their influence. And as their influence spread, so did their fortune. The system was deceptively simple. Families didn't compete for wealth. They exchanged it. They bartered with trust. What was an investment on paper became a connection in practice. Every tie forged built a system that reached far beyond gold and land. It was a network of influence, spanning generations. But all of this began in silence. So, how did this old method of wealth building survive through the centuries? How did it evolve? Keep that in mind as we move forward. Trust might be the oldest form of wealth, but it's far from the only one they used. The true engine of wealth is rarely discussed. It isn't just about stocks, bonds, or commodities. It's about something much older, something far more powerful. Trust. Trust, in its purest form, isn't something you see. It's a force that binds, a silent currency. The world's oldest families knew this. They didn't accumulate their fortunes through flashy transactions. Instead, they built a web of trust. Each family's wealth was tethered to another, not by laws or contracts, but by the promise of loyalty. The more bonds a family could forge, the greater their fortune became. Look closely at the intricate networks of these families. They understood that wealth didn't just sit in vaults or land. It was passed along, quietly, through bonds of trust, a loan made without interest, an investment placed with no expectation of return. Marriages weren't just for love. They were strategic alliances. The unions between powerful families acted as silent contracts, ensuring the wealth was held steady, passed on, and grown. In this system, wealth wasn't just about ownership. It was about influence. The family that could be trusted to safeguard its allies' interests became wealthier, not in cash, but in loyalty and power. And that's where their fortune lay, not in the tangible assets, but in the invisible threads that connected them to others. Trust is the glue that holds these dynasties together. But here's the catch. Trust alone won't build wealth. It needs more. It needs leverage. Without it, trust would be just a promise, and promises don't make empires. This is where the real power shift happens, where wealth moves from the realm of trust to the realm of control. When you think of wealth, what comes to mind? Buildings, gold, money in the bank. But behind the curtain of wealth, there's something far more powerful, something less visible, but far more effective: leverage. For centuries, the wealthiest families didn't just own things, they controlled them. They leveraged their land, their businesses, and even their names to propel themselves forward. The key? Leverage isn't just about using money, it's about using relationships, influence, and favor. These families didn't simply invest in assets. They invested in people, in networks, and in the goodwill that came with it. Every deal they made wasn't just a transaction, it was a step in a carefully choreographed dance. A dance of power, influence, and control. Each time they forged a new relationship or made a strategic alliance, they didn't just gain another asset, they gained more leverage. The more leverage they had, the faster their wealth grew, until it snowballed, expanding beyond the scope of what anyone could truly track. They expanded faster than anyone realized. What appeared to be a series of innocent investments was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated strategy to use leverage at every turn. They used their land, their businesses, their names, and yes, even their reputations, as collateral in a game that no one else was privy to. But here's the irony. What once seemed like a quiet game of trust and favors began to resemble something more brutal, collateral damage. As the leverage expanded, it didn't always land where they intended. It wasn't just about control anymore, it was about power. And with power comes casualties. Then the leverage expanded, faster than money could catch up. At first, more was better. More wealth, more influence, more connections. But somewhere along the way, the rules changed. What began as careful accumulation morphed into reckless speculation. The families that once grew cautiously through trust and leverage became addicted to excess. They grew accustomed to the idea that more could always be gained. More land, more businesses, more alliances, more wealth. But with each expansion, the foundation began to erode. The system wasn't built for endless growth. It wasn't designed to sustain this level of excess. And yet, they kept piling it on. Wealth on top of wealth, debt on top of debt. Risk replaced prudence. What was once a careful, deliberate process became a race to the top, without thought for what would happen when it all came crashing down. And then it happened. The inevitable, the crash. But it wasn't just a simple collapse. It wasn't a failure of the system. It was a warning. A warning that the very foundation of the wealth these families had built was an illusion. The trust, the leverage, the power, all of it, crumbling under its own weight. The crash wasn't the end. It was the symptom of a disease that had been festering for generations. We'll come back to this. But remember, collapse often reveals the true cost. What was once hidden in the shadows is now out in the open, sort of. The systems that built the old dynasties have survived, not by fading into the past, but by adapting. The game hasn't changed, it's simply evolved. The mechanics of wealth building remain as they were centuries ago, but now they're cloaked in the digital veil of technology. Today, these families no longer need to rely on land or physical assets to build their fortune. Instead, they leverage technology, digital assets, encrypted investments, and blockchain. The tools are different, but the purpose is the same. They still use relationships and influence as their currency, but now these relationships are tracked in code. What was once held in vaults is now held in digital wallets. What was once passed hand to hand in secret meetings is now sent through encrypted transactions. The key to modern wealth is not just ownership, it's control. Families have learned to control vast sums of money without ever needing to touch it. Digital assets give them the ability to maintain their dominance over markets, governments, and industries without ever having to leave their high-rise offices. The game is still about connections, trust, and leveraging what you have. But now, it's hidden behind apps, algorithms, and cryptography. But as it was then, so it is now. The tools have changed, but the method has not. The names are different, but the game is the same. What began as a series of carefully crafted family alliances within local territories has now stretched across the globe. A network once confined to the corridors of Europe, Asia, and America now spans continents, influencing economies far beyond their original reach. These families have learned one crucial lesson: the world is their playing field, and wealth once localized knows no borders. Today, modern dynasties wield their power through a global financial web. They can move capital from one continent to another in mere moments. They can influence entire industries, shape national policies, and shift the tides of markets, all without ever leaving the comfort of their private offices. In a world where information flows instantly and money can be transferred with the tap of a screen, the old barriers of geography and regulation have become almost meaningless. The global nature of trade, the speed of information, these are merely the newest tools these dynasties use to maintain their power. The same methods that built their fortunes in the 14th century now fuel their dominance in the 21st. Will the system collapse under its own weight, or is it simply too well-oiled to fail? If this exploration of wealth and power has made you rethink everything you knew about the global economy, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to this channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think? Are we heading towards a system that's too powerful to collapse, or will its very complexity bring it to the edge? Let's talk about it.